Welcome, viewers of Let's Talk America Radio. Welcome to another edition of Real Talk, produced by Let's Talk America with host Shayna Thornton. Of course, I'm Shayna, on-air host and executive producer. And tonight we have another episode that will encourage, inspire, and motivate you. Tonight, my exclusive guest is one and only Jason Davis. He's an acclaimed author, speaker, and teacher. And his specialty is working with business professionals, entrepreneurs, those in the corporate field. However you mix it up, he's worked with so many different individuals, and he adds his own personal component of faith with it. So this is a very relevant and timely conversation for many of you watching us right now. We do encourage you to share this episode, and we're going to talk about the work life balance, the career, looking for your purpose, making sure you are thriving in a manner that really coincides with your faith. And where do you go when that business deal or that business move of chess really questions the integrity that you have with your faith? Well, I'm no expert, but this guy is. Jason, one of the traditions we have on Real Talk is we ask our exclusive guests to share for 2 minutes or less about their journey, right? So I've read the resume, I've seen it. You're amazing. I've been to the website. Individuals who read your book, they rave about it. But I want you to explain right now to our viewers out there what got you to this point? What motivated you to write this book? Because it's one that's needed. And I want you to share the name of your book as well and what really inspired and got us where we are. Take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shayna. And it's an honor to be here tonight. So the book that I wrote, Fortify, Being Rooted in God's Plan for Work and Business, it is launching this month on March the 30th. And so I'm so excited for everybody to be able to read it. And it's interesting because this book is a culmination of business lessons and life experiences that I've had over the past several years. So, what makes me tick, what got me to this point, is just my background. I grew up in my family, we had financial difficulties and we dealt with a lot of hardships. And so the motivation to start, doing business and even to write came out of a place of lack and of pain. And we've all had things that we've walked through. And I know that I didn't want any other family, any man or woman to go through what I went through. So my inspiration really is people. And it's interesting because many of you out there, many ideas and innovations and things like that have been born out of a place of hardship or trials. And so, Shannon, that's what really motivated me, not just in writing the book, but just being an entrepreneur myself, adding value to others so that they can then take that value and add value to other people themselves.
Wow, I love that. Thank you for the transparency and the vulnerability of admitting your background and what really
Mhm.
motivated you. And I think so many times when we walk the walk ourselves, we're much more knowledgeable about it, right? Because I always say, speaking about things theoretically, will only take you so far. So you can relate
Mhm.
with so many professionals out there, regardless of where they are on that spectrum. That brings me to the first question I have. There are many people watching us that's like, unfair. Jason has figured it out, right? Shayna has figured it out. The person next door figured it out. The purpose, right? Your purpose is helping other business people really understand why they are where they are, right? I understand that I have a passion to get information out to keep people informed. But there's someone that's like, they're bright, they're funny, they've got all these attributes, but they can't quite figure out the purpose of what they're supposed to do. And you know, COVID 19, 2020, 2021 has been trying years for so many different people. And I think more and more people are looking at their lives and saying, okay, I've got one life and I've got these goals and these visions that I want to put down on paper, but they still keep procrastinating. How do they figure out the purpose?
When it comes to purpose, it takes my mind a few places. Number one, I believe every single human on this planet is born with a plan and a purpose, a God given one. And I think several things, whether it's events or our own emotions, they get in the way of us working and walking out the purpose to which we've been called. And so when I think about purpose, there's a few things. There's positioning, and then there's a plan. And by positioning, I mean, what are the the skill sets and things that you are good at. And I know a lot of people, they don't automatically go there, but everybody is good or has an affinity for something. And then when I talk about plans, that's where your passion comes in. So really the intersection of that passion, what gets you going in the morning? What gets you eager to attack the day? So that plan couples with your passion, and then secondly the positioning. What is it that you're good at? If you take a really hard look and take inventory of your skill sets, what you've been exposed to, my wife likes to say she is a walking solution to a problem that's out there, and I love when she says that. And I think all of us can learn from that same lesson, is based on my life experiences, no matter my age or my gender or my background financially or socially, what can I do that I'm passionate about? Because when you take time out to reflect on that, that's when things come alive. But we've got to walk through that process. And because we live in this hustle and bustle world, I think therein lies one of many issues, is we don't take time to take that inventory, because life is a journey, and a lot of times we want everything right now, but we've got to walk through that process. But once you walk through that process and do the work of taking inventory, thinking about your skill sets, your talents, your abilities, your passion, and then making a plan, it all comes together. Because Shannon, those people out there, they've never worked a day in their life when they really have found that sweet spot.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. As the old adage says, when you do what you love, you don't feel like it's work, right? That's true most of the
Mhm.
time. Wink, wink, what you
Yeah.
say, Jason.
Yeah.
um, let's talk about the R word of replication. And I bring
Mm.
that up because there are many people that are searching, right? Most of us
Mhm.
at some point in our lives are searching if it's wisdom or what are we supposed to do. Again, the career goals, the business, the platform. But a lot of people will look at perhaps an Oprah Winfrey or a Jason
Mhm.
Davis or Debbie Allen and say, you know what, they're successful at it. They seem happy at it. I'll replicate that for myself. Talk about the
Mhm.
dangers of that. And that's not to say we cannot be inspired by an Oprah Winfrey, I sure am, or a Debbie
Mhm.
Allen. I grew up looking up to her. But how important is it, and bring our faith into it, to really
Mhm.
be authentically who we should be? And I'll say this for me because it feels more natural when it's that way. But talk about
Mhm.
so many people when they're searching. You've worked with business professionals, Jason.
Mhm.
They're like, I want to be like this person and make me like this person. But
Right.
talk about that angle because I think so many people battle with it if they admit it or not.
Mhm. Absolutely. Replication is a powerful word and business concept, and a huge, huge thing when it comes to replication is context, right? Everybody didn't have the same circumstances. You think about, Steve Jobs, or you think about all these different inventors or prominent people. You talked about Oprah. Context matters, right? Some of us grew up in an urban area or a suburban area or out in the country. That's a certain context. I don't have the context that maybe somebody who grew up in a farming agricultural environment. I grew up in a combination. I have family in the, from the inner city of Philadelphia, but I spent most of my time growing up in the suburbs of Atlanta, even though I was born in Philadelphia. And so context matters. So you can take the best practices from people. So, kind of like in Oprah, you can learn from her and take examples. But I think it's important, and this is why it's so critical, the critical thinking aspect in taking inventory, because you're just not going to go out and do exactly what an Oprah Winfrey did. You're not going to go out and do exactly what a Bill Gates did. Some people, oh, well, I dropped out of college and it was fine. It's like, that's great, but know that the conditions associated with that person's success, it varies man to man, woman to woman, family to family, what's your cultural background. And so I'd say with replication, context matters. So look at the principles, because principles transcend circumstance. So general principles such as hard work, right? Hard work can be applied in every area. So take the principle like hard work, but then where a lot of people struggle is practice. So a practice that Oprah does, you may not be able to apply. And then what's your industry? Do you work with corporate entities? Do you work with small businesses? Do you work primarily with a certain niche? Are you in technology? Are you in healthcare? Are you in beauty? Those are completely different contexts. So I think best practices and knowing when to apply them and seeking out wisdom from other folks. And then you inject something like your faith. You
Yeah.
see, as a follower of Christ, and I know not everybody is, but as a follower of Christ, we have access to wisdom. And in the book of James, it talks about if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask. So you can be led by God and ask wisdom. And the book of Proverbs is another book in the Bible that talks about wisdom, so that you can work smarter, not harder. And now, again, that's not to nuance on particular scriptures meaning certain things, because we've also got to have a good concept and good theology of scripture. Not getting deep, I'm not talking about seminary school or anything like that, but we've got to understand, what is God saying in his word? What is the history of the text? Where is my life at right now? And what is the concept that I can take away so I can go live out my faith and apply that in my life and my business and in my finances?
Absolutely. What a great conversation. We're talking with the one and only acclaimed author and speaker and teacher, Jason Davis. We're on tonight talking about work life balance, and we're talking about your purpose, finding that and being comfortable in it. We even talked about not replicating or emulating other people just because we admire them. And like you said, you seek wisdom from it, but we have to feel comfortable with being us. Jason, let's transition right now to those individuals that have already accomplished the business. They've set it up, they're good to go. And one of the things that I often find with so many entrepreneurs out there, they will talk about the work life balance of they're working on their business, they're working in the business. There's so much that comes with it. And they often struggle with the balance part, the family time. And they're like, well, it's Sunday, it's the Sabbath. I'm a person of faith, but I've got some accounting I need to do. And if I don't do it now, I'll never catch up. Regardless if the daughter is saying, can we go outside and we do some cartwheels? They're struggling with that. Talk with us about that, and how there are a lot of parents out there that have the G word of guilt that's
Oh,
associated with it when they can't necessarily dedicate all the time they would like to, because they're saying, well, I'm building this vision that is going to be a legacy for my children. I'm going to add this caveat though. I recently watched someone interview a very successful businesswoman, and they asked her if her child was going to follow in her footsteps. And she said, the boldest thing I'd heard in months. She said, this is my dream. It wasn't my child's dream. And it's unfair to force that on them. And that made me think so much when we talk about legacy. It's not always financial. It's not always leaving the partnership of the LLC. It could also be showing your child simply you go your own route. You feel comfortable with what you want to do. And you may not want this cookie business, but you want to maybe perhaps start an art shop. So talk to us about that, and the importance of trying to achieve all of that, and not walking around with so much guilt in the midst of being a successful or striving entrepreneur.
absolutely. I would say a couple of things. The word wealth comes to mind, and I don't think wealth is just financial. I think it's twofold. I think part of wealth, one aspect is an inheritance, and a second part of that is legacy, as you mentioned. And I believe a legacy is comprised of faith, hope, and love. And that's where things like values and traditions and things like that come into play. And so that's the legacy part. I think sometimes there's confusion in what's legacy and what's an inheritance. And just as the example you gave with a child, it's sitting down and talking as a family, and then even injecting faith into it, and really asking in your personal devotion time to God is, how, again, this comes back to knowing purpose. I know my purpose. And then sit and talk with your children, and what are you seeing, because there's something you can be told, which is an overarching theme for your life, your business, but then there's the current, like what's actually happening. So I heard a pastor or a minister say it this way: God speaks, but what is he specifically speaking in the moment? And I think as business owners, it's the same thing. You know, you're big for the ones who do, you know, your big overarching theme and vision of what you want to do. And sometimes you can get so fixated on that that you miss being in the moment of right now. So, and I think a big part of that is understanding what's inheritance and what's legacy, because I just personally, I believe those are different. And that when you know that and understand your purpose, then that gets into the balance. And you talked about guilt and things like that. So on the guilt side, I believe the guilt begins to dwindle when you put things like systems into play. That's where we start getting into habits. And I'm big on systems as well. When you start to automate processes and things, think about like your email, Shayna, or marketing. There are systems that can take some of that knowledge out of the brain and put it into a system for customer service and follow up and answering the phone. That way, the better you can detach yourself, not that you don't focus on serving your customers, but you can detach things that really can be automated or delegated. And then that guilt will begin to go away because you've got a system to handle the business. And then you've also got an understanding of your family legacy and the inheritance part. So big on systems, big on values, big on purpose. And that will help people discern the difference of what they're trying to do and accomplish.
Such a great point. My father has a saying. He says, the only way a child knows you is through time, right? And
Mm,
so many times I think we live in a society, you know this, where we're going, and we're paying the bills. And obviously you do have to pay rent, water,
mhm,
electricity. I know by no means am I saying don't do that. But I think so many times we think the money part, the wealth part, to your point,
mhm.
is what almost makes us a great parent, right? Sometimes in
Right.
certain family dynamics or communities that has been pushed, and if you're not around, that's acceptable because the money is there at least. But
Mhm.
I've interviewed too many people, Jason, to not know that the time put in is really what adults, what we recall when we're children. It's that part
Mhm.
because very few of us can remember what we got at Christmas. Or our birthday when we were 12 years old, but we can often remember if our parents or grandparents were around
Yeah.
to support us and give us that sense of security that is so key for
Yeah.
childhood. So, such a great conversation. You brought up the A word of attachment, and I want to talk about
Mhm.
that. I recently took part in a conversation with business women that were talking about work life balance and children.
Mhm.
And one of the women was very open and she shared that she sort of struggled some with conversations with her children because she was so
Mhm.
passionate about her business and her platform. She found herself talking about it all the time, right?
Ah.
It's like, oh, I'm really excited about this and I'm talking about it. But she started to notice that one of her kids was like, can we talk about something other than the business?
Mm.
And let's talk about that. And that's a light story for her and her child. But overall, because you know this and I know this, you perhaps can be on a Zoom because of COVID. You're safely conversing with a family member or a friend, and it's nothing wrong with bringing up things that are important to you. And if you're
Mhm.
passionate about your business or platform, that's going to be a part of it. But how healthy is it if every conversation is dominated by the business or that career driven part? And I only say that because so many people have an understanding, at least they verbalize it, that it's God and family, right? They verbalize
Right.
that. Now, it's not always being shown, but that's what they'll say.
Mhm.
But through conversation, or through their actions or absence that you find, sometimes the work part seems to really be a little higher up there than they're willing to admit. So, talk with
Mhm.
us about that balance part of you've got your business, you're excited about your baby business, right? And you should, you're proud of it. But when is there a time to really disattach it and say, okay, I've got to cut it off because I've got to be a present wife. I've got to be a present husband. I've got to be a present parent. I've got to be a present daughter for my mother and father. Talk to us about that. Or because I know there are entrepreneurs out there, business professionals that will push back and say, hey, if they're not happy for me, then maybe there's something else going on there with them and it's not me. But we've got to be accountable, right, Jason, to sort of say
Mhm.
maybe we're sometimes a bit overzealous about it and it's not healthy.
Exactly, Shayna. And I would say two concepts were burning in my head as you were talking about that. I think about identity and I think about boundaries. It's interesting when you know this, not just from interviewing people, even in your day-to-day life, Shayna, when people introduce themselves, it's very subtle, but if you pay attention, oh, I'm a mom, I'm a dad, I'm a business owner. And that I am phrasing is very interesting. And the Bible talks about out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so sometimes if we've put our whole identity into the running of the business, it ends up coming out. And my gosh, children they're so pure and they just say it. And so for that, and that lady's example with her child, just the authenticity, it's like, wow, am I as important? And again, it's not to knock the parenting or anything like that, but and not just the child's case, but in any aspect, if you're a person listening to that person, it's like, wow, what else is valuable? What else matters? It's not that business doesn't matter, but what else makes you go? What else makes you tick? Because surely working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, that can't be it. Even if you found your passion and it doesn't even feel like work. I think sometimes this is getting a little bit under the chest a little bit, but we can kind of invoke some pride and some arrogance into the passion with which we pursue things. And so the identity is big, and then that's where the boundaries come. Really sitting down, talking with your spouse or significant other, talking with your children, what's realistic? And that's where planning comes into play. What is the revenue that I need to generate with the number of hours that I have to take care of my home? And knowing that number provides clarity and focus. So then you're not bleeding into the weekends. And I know that's getting into systematic strategy and whatnot, but it's true. If you know the number and you know what your household needs or the lifestyle you like to live, that's numbers, right? Because Shannon, numbers don't care about our emotions. Numbers are just numbers. So if you know your number, and you set up, that's why I'm big on systems, and the system says do X, Y, and Z. And if that's all you have to do, then do that. And then, wipe off the hands and go spend time with your family, and then just be in the moment, live in the now, have fruitful conversations with significant others, with family, with children, aunts, uncles, those that we love to spend time with.
Such a great point. And Jason, I will add that for a lot of business professionals or entrepreneurs, this right here
Oh, geez.
is a byproduct because they'll be like, I'm off, I'm here at the park with you. But then you and I have
Mhm.
seen this many times, right? In restaurants before COVID, now with Zooms, they're doing what? They're on one device on the Zoom and you see them do this. And
Mhm.
the question is, you kept saying in the moment. Are they really in the moment? Because being in the
Mhm.
moment, and I'm not trying to slap anyone's wrist here because I think everyone has been there
Mhm.
at some point if you're a go-getter, but being in the moment is being really truly attentive to the
Mhm.
individuals you're with, right? Not saying I'm here at the basketball game, right? I'm here reading with the family, but yet the phone is still an option. It's you're going through this. So what a great point. Let's talk about pulling back. And it's
Mm.
a topic many entrepreneurs or successful driven people don't want to talk about, right? Especially if you believe you're hot. You're like, I'm in the groove. I've got it. So many ideas are coming. The clients are coming, or whatever, however the business is set up, or you feel you're on the brink. But I want to talk about that balance in your life overall, right? And you're saying, well, it's a numbers game, but you're right. Numbers are just numbers. It doesn't take into effect that you have children that may be going through something in school. It doesn't take into the fact that you have a wife or a husband or a mother or a father or a friend that needs you right now emotionally, because that never comes into the picture. And you don't want to be so stoic and black and white, right? Where it's, well, if you don't fit into this system or you don't fit into these numbers, then you just don't. And I'll get to you when you can. Talk about the struggle. And I'm talking about things people don't want to talk about right now on this edition of
Mhm.
Real Talk with the one and only career expert, teacher, speaker, Jason Davis. Talk to me about being able to know when to pull back, even if that means you're at the brink. Because sometimes, people will say, but the kid is going through something. And you know
Right.
this, Jason, life happens. It doesn't say, is it a good time to come up with this issue or this challenge, right? There are constant ups and downs. But talk about pulling back when perhaps there's something unexpected that happens with a parent, or perhaps you understand or see in the relationship your significant other is requiring more, or that your child is really having a tough time with the breakup of who they were dating at 17 years old. These are real things that happen to real people.
Yeah, Shayna, pulling back, this is where wisdom comes into play. Wisdom and having awareness. I'm big on emotional intelligence. I'm big on continuous improvement. And a big part of emotional intelligence is listening, because listening begets your ability to show empathy. And a lot of times, we don't know how to pull back because we're quite honestly not good listeners, and we're not actively working on becoming a better listener. So I think sharpening that skill set of becoming a better listener, because when you're able to listen, you're not missing those signals. See, there's always signaling that's going on. The question is, are we listening and paying attention? And then this is where your faith comes in too, right? Because we've got our natural eyes and we got our spirit eyes. So when both of those work together and you notice that look on your child's face that's a little bit different, you just don't continue on with your day. You can pull he or she aside and say, hey, what's going on? I noticed when we were talking, you seemed a little downcast, but we've got to be in the moment and know the difference. So wisdom is one of those things that does that. Another thing, if we're working on emotionally intelligent skill sets like listening, I don't care, probably there's people who are really good listeners, somewhere in between, and then people are terrible listeners. No matter what category you fall in, all of us can be better listeners. As a husband who's getting ready to celebrate 5 years of marriage with my wife, I can tell you, I can always be a better listener. Always. So there's never a time. I don't think anybody has nailed it totally in their marriage or being a parent or being a business owner, but I assure you the skill set of listening traverses all three of those categories. So I think a big part of that, of knowing when to call it, is a factor of listening, because listening begets the awareness, and then the awareness allows us to have clarity and focus.
And you knowing when to call it. You brought that up, and that brings me to an important question we want to
Mhm.
certainly address before we conclude this eye-opening and such a great conversation, Jason. We're speaking with the one and only acclaimed author, speaker, and teacher, Jason Davis. We're talking about work-life balance. You're watching Real Talk, produced by Let's Talk America Radio. I'm Shayna Thornton. Thank you for joining us. We do encourage you to share this episode and leave your comments here in the post as well, if this is on Facebook and also on YouTube. And we encourage you as well on Instagram for the snippets that will be shared. But Jason, knowing when,
Mhm.
let's talk about that. Okay.
Mhm.
Someone perhaps is thriving in their career. They're having a great chance of getting to the top. If it's a company they built or a company they're working for someone else, regardless of where they are, the question of integrity comes up.
Mhm.
And I know, and I don't care if you work at a fast food restaurant, you work for a Fortune 500, or you work for yourself. There are things we witness from other people, sometimes perhaps even ourselves, sometimes if we're being honest, where there are some things that's like, well, is that truly a reflection of your personal faith? Right. That we
Mhm.
know as people of faith that are Christians, there are things very clearly, right, defined and
Mhm.
laid out. And there are individuals who've shared with me that there are times they have struggled with that. And I think it's the elephant in the room that very few people want to talk about. And as
Mhm.
I shared with you before we went on air, in a culture of business, so
Yeah.
much of what is complimented and praised and uplifted is your shark, right? And no pun
Mhm.
intended on shows named after that, but you're driven, you're shark driven, you take no prisoners, right? These are things that are pluses. They're not negative dynamics in the world of business. They're like, they're, even some people have said they're cutthroat and they'll get the job done. But there are very few religions I know of, and I don't know of any that will say this, being familiar with
Mhm.
multiple religions out there, that praise you and give you a check mark for
Yeah.
being cutthroat, for being dirty, if you will, right? And let's talk about
Mhm.
it because I think so many times we scoot around it in interviews or conversations with friends, and often people will even say they're blessed. Look at all the success they have, when we know very well there were some non-ethical practices that took place for those individuals to get there.
Mhm.
So the overall question, being a good steward of your faith and being super successful and driven, do those always go hand in hand? And when you find yourself in a situation where it's not, encourage those, and I'm only going to guess which way you're going to encourage them, but to choose what's right, what's moral, what we want our children to know that we chose, over saying, well, I closed the deal. I got the big contract. So I'm able to pay rent for several months. Come on, give me a break. Help us out.
Right. Absolutely. Oof, integrity is huge. And the root word that you see inside the word integrity is integer, right? Going back to math, and an integer is a whole number. So I think integrity is not just doing the right thing when no one's looking, it's also doing the right thing when everybody is looking, and being a whole, complete person. And that's where things like morals come into play, and values. So for instance, my four values that my wife and I go by, and also as well in my business, they spell out the word silk, SILK. The S stands for stewardship, the stands for, as you said it, integrity, the L stands for leadership, specifically servant leadership, and the K stands for Kaizen. You heard me say earlier, continuous improvement. If any of you all are engineers or technology professionals, you've probably heard that term before, Kaizen, meaning continuous change or continuous improvement. And so the way I kind of traverse that, and those four came from our devotion time. My wife and I came together, we prayed, we spent time. Is what I'm doing or not doing a good example of stewardship? Is what I'm doing or not doing integral? Is what I'm doing or not doing good leadership? Is what I'm doing or not doing, am I growing? Is that Kaizen mindset? And a lot of people, when you don't have a second nature value system, when you get under pressure, like you're talking about, Shana, when you're about to shake hands with someone, you're not really sure, it's a little shady. Well, what are you going to default to? Because under pressure reveals who we are, and we've got to have a solid foundation. So those are my values. And feel free, if you've got any kind of dispensation that's similar or the same, feel free to use them. I'm just giving example of what my wife and I follow, but that's how we look at things. Stewardship. Are we being a good steward of our money, time, talent, health, and relationships? Integrity. There's been some products and services that my wife just said, I believe that product or service does what it intends to do, but I don't feel that it lines up with doing the right thing, not just in our eyes, but in the eyes of God. So that's kind of how, the integrity plays out. And then leadership, serving. Is this an opportunity to serve and help people? Because when you help someone else, you yourself get helped. That's the law of reciprocity, sowing and reaping. And then, Kaizen, between my wife and I, we probably read anywhere from 2 to 4 books per month between the two of us. And now some people are like, oh my God, well, folks, that's why there's Audible, there's Kindle, there's the library, there's a lot of different ways you can read. So don't be intimidated by the number. But I say all that to say, college was not the last time we read. We're still reading to this day. And so a big part of integrity is having values. Like you said earlier, Shana, you can't really think of any religion that's going to outright tell you, do this or not do this. They're pretty uniform, and things like sowing and reaping or not, disrespecting people. But a key thing in that, Shana, is we've got to know, in order to know your value system, it's like, well, where does your value system come from? And you understanding the nuances. So for me, as a follower of Christ, I've got to understand what does the Bible say about some of these situations? For like one scripture that comes to mind, Shane, a lot of people may have read this or not. The Bible talks about those who borrow and don't repay, they're wicked. That's a very like, whew, that's a tough statement to hear, but think about that. Think about people making loans all the time with their small business loans centered all the time. And so if you sign the promissory note to pay it and then somehow you don't, that's there's got to be, is are you okay with that? Do you understand what God and your faith, and so that's the thing, you have to understand the root system of your values, which, for me is Jesus Christ and what the Bible says. But then how does that factor into real life? That's an example I give. I know that I want to repay. It's not about rule following. It's when I do that, I honor God. When I repay as scheduled, number one, I honor God. Number two, I honor that business. I made a promise to that business to pay that loan or that payment or that revenue or that tax or whatever it is. And so I pay that. What that does, it creates a feedback loop of honesty and integrity. And then they then want to go and do more business with me because they can count on me, because they trust me. And to prominent author Stephen Covey's point, everything moves at the speed of trust. So integrity has a lot of different parts, but I think values is a big part of that. And then understanding your value system, which if you say that you're a Christian or a Christ follower, that's understanding what the Bible says about some of these situations, such as borrowing and not repaying.
Yeah. Such a great conversation, such great words of wisdom as well. And basically you're saying stay focused on what you are and what you're driven for and what is a
Mm-hmm.
reflection of you. And I happen to say this because I think as you go through life and you appreciate the opportunities and the journey, even the ups and downs, you ideally want to look back and have as few regrets as possible. We know
Mm-hmm.
we're forgiven for things that were done, but as my father always says, but if there are things you can learn and ahead of time, right, you just be very
Mm-hmm.
conscious of that. And I think obviously trying to be as decent and as compassionate to people as possible, because for me, I speak for this professionally and personally, it's so much bigger than the moment. It's so much
Yeah.
bigger than the deal and the contract. For me, that's me. Now everybody is wired different, but you simply truly hope that we all can treat each other decent, as we all learn in kindergarten. Maybe reminded of that. Jason,
Yes.
before we head out, can you give us one piece of advice, entrepreneurs out there, business professionals, that you really see is the best nugget? I know that's hard because you've shared so many great nuggets with us
Mm-hmm.
here on this episode of Let's Talk America Radio. But any lasting words that may just be that nugget to help someone, no matter where they are on the spectrum of their business career journey?
Ooh, there's so much there, but I guess um, coming into this, Shane, I've been talking to a lot of people about rest, and I know this might be a little bit different from, oh, Jason, are you going to say something about leadership or management or something like that? And I could, but because rest has kind of been something I've been talking to a lot of people about, I wanted to give an equation. Again, I'm a very analytical thinker, and that is rest is a component of three things. So refreshment and replenishment. So refreshment plus replenishment equals sustainability. Refreshment means the re means again, and the fresh means new. So to when you rest, you become new again. And then replenish, again means again, and then the plenish part is to be filled up. So when you're made new again, plus when you're filled up again, that equals sustainability. There's a lot of other factors to that, which we touched on some of those today, but that's why we must rest. Even if you're a driven person, to the driven person, I would say, I know I'm kind of giving two things here, Shayna, but to the driven person, I would really challenge you to take inventory. And I was asked this question personally last year. Jason, are you driven to do what you're doing, or are you called to do what you're doing? Ambition's okay, but is it relentless ambition or is it focused ambition? And that was really the heart of that question, because there's a difference between, because when you're driving is striving, but when you're called, it is a clear focus of identity, and that's where the you understand what it means to know who you are, to have systems, and then how rest plays into that. So replenishment or refreshment plus replenishment equals sustainability.
Wow, I love that. What a great two-part answer and some great nuggets for all of us to really abide by, regardless of where we are on the spectrum of the journey of our career or the platform that we want to so much establish and see successful and grow. Thank you, Jason Davis. What a pleasure and honor to speak with you here on Let's Talk America Radio. Before you head out, where can our viewers go for additional information about your latest book and also more nuggets?
Absolutely. In fact, some of the things I touched on today, like that equation about rest, that comes out of my chapter, ironically called Rest, out of my new book coming out on March the 30th, and the title is Fortify, Being Rooted in God's Plan for Work and Business. You can go to Amazon.com to pre-order the ebook, the Kindle version. The paperback launches directly on March the 30th. So that's more of a debut thing, kind of like a movie. If you want more information on the book itself, go to www.fortifybook.com.
Awesome. Wow. What a great conversation, Jason. So excited to have you on. You've really, really helped us have a true understanding of work-life balance. We're going to have you back on. But best wishes with your book and all of the information you're sharing with all of us. We appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this edition of Let's Talk America Radio. Of course, we present Real Talk as much as possible to bring you the best and the brightest. And you can see this episode featured one of the best and the brightest out there. We cover so many different topics that may influence and impact your life. If not today, it may be tomorrow. If it's not for you, it could be for your sister, your favorite cousin, or a coworker or friend. We're in this together, and sharing information is what we aim to do here on Let's Talk America Radio. For additional information, please visit ltaradio.com. That's ltaradio.com. Follow us on Facebook, the fabulous Facebook, on Instagram. We're out there on Twitter as well, and YouTube. Use the handle LTA Radio, LTA Radio. If you can't remember that, use hashtag LTA Radio. Connect with us. We do follow back. Okay, everyone, stay safe and continue to be informed and inspired. Until next time, take care. Thanks again, Jason.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.